It's thinking about it. There we go. We are live. Fantastic. Let's get started. Wonderful. All right. So, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So, I'm Cronk, the book guy, and today we're interviewing Amie Kaufman, the author of a million different books, like so many different books. Just one prolific book factory, one woman army, right? So, we're going to talk to her. We're going to ask her all these questions about her books. Amie, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Very honored.
Oh, it is a pleasure. We had a really good chat at Book Fair Australia. So when you asked me if I wanted to have another one, it was a very easy yes.
Thank you. Oh, that's high praise. I had no idea what I was doing through most of Book Fair. That was winging it very hard. So I'm glad it came across as certain competence.
You sure did. I was seated near where the panels were happening, so I got to listen in on a few. I thought they were going very well.
Excellent. Well, that's good to know. Well, let's hope this goes well too. Okay, we'll see what we end up with. Let's just remind everyone who you are. I mean, I'm sure they don't need it, but just in case. So, Amie, one of the big ones that you've done is the Illuminae Files. I think that's what most people will know you for. Like if you Google Amie Kaufman, that's the first one that comes up, which you co-wrote with Jay Kristoff.
I sure did.
What's the other big one? I think. Was it Aurora Rising? Is that sort of the other big one that you're known for?
Look, I'd say Aurora Rising is the other big series I wrote with Jay. With Meg Spooner, they probably know me best for These Broken Stars, and on my own, probably best for The Isles of the Gods.
Yes, actually, I have that one. There we go. This one here. It's got an excellent cover. I just want to point out, there's a ship. I mean, oh, there it is. Yeah, I love that.
Having had nothing to do with the cover, obviously, I feel like I can just join in and say, yeah, it's gorgeous artwork. I love it so much.
Gotta love a good cover.
Such a talented
artist. It really
artist.
sells it, doesn't it? Fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm just going to adjust my camera just to micromanage. But yes, you've done a lot of things. And it's crazy too, because you're primarily in YA, but you do a bit of fantasy YA, a lot of sci-fi YA, and you've done a lot of middle grade books as well.
I do.
Very prolific. Yeah.
So it's my full-time job
today. Yeah. So you got the time for it.
I do, yeah. And I think that's important to say because I am prolific and I'm known for it. And a lot of people are like, how do you write so much? And what they really mean is, why don't I write so much? Like, is there a flaw in me? And I'm like, no. The answer is I get up in the morning, I take off my night PJs, I put on my day PJs because that's an important division. And then my job is to write all day. So I have the time to produce these books.
That is a big consideration. As someone who's working on books, but also a YouTube channel and also still a part-time job, there's definitely a lack of time to write the next book. I'll feel it.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, when I was writing my first books, when I was writing These Broken Stars and Illuminae, I was working full-time and writing full-time. And that was a ride. I don't think I would be able to do that today. I was sort of powered by sheer determination to get this thing done. But yeah, I don't know how I did it. And I did get sick. So there is that. When people say, how did it work? The answer is, to some degree, it did not, in fact, work.
Yeah. Your health collapsed. Yeah. Yes, very normal. Funny that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we don't do that anymore.
Well, let's talk about that, actually, because I was curious about your journey towards being a full-time author. So where did it all begin? Because it sounds like you were working on a couple of projects at the same time early on.
Yeah, I mean, early on, I'm always writing more than one thing at once. I'm doing it right now. But originally I was writing while I was working, and the way that I did things a little bit differently is, I think a lot of authors will write, a few novels before they produce something that they're like, yes, this is a thing that I would share with the world. And I instead sort of got the equivalent sort of practice writing fan fiction. And I wrote fan fiction for, 20 years, like millions and millions and millions of words. And it's a great teacher because, it teaches you characterization. It teaches you kind of world building and how you can use world building in your story. It teaches you the importance of both the overarching plot and the vignette. There's nothing it doesn't do. And so I spent, 20 years writing fan fiction. And only then did I sort of hit the point of thinking, maybe I would try and write something original. And so I'd done so much practice that by the time I finally started, I wasn't just someone saying, oh, I'm going to write a book and having my first go. I was seasoned, just not at this.
Very true. Because I think too, like a lot of people might be inclined to dismiss fan fiction as illegitimate literature, but it's definitely good practice, isn't it? It's like writing with the training wheels still on while you get your handle over it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's people absolutely dismiss it, and it's been interesting to see that change a little bit. It used to be that, 10 years ago, if I was doing a school visit, I'd say, and now we're going to talk about the F word, the teachers would freak out, and then I would say fan fiction, and they would not freak out that much less, to be honest. And I think it's because there was this kind of snobbery around it, and I think these days people are starting to understand that it's a really legitimate form of writing. And I think most readers would be surprised to find out how many of the authors they love came through first in fan fiction. But for me, it can be a training wheels thing where it's, okay, so I'm going to take these characters out and sub my own characters in, but I've got the whole world already created for me. But it can also be kind of the equivalent of an American Ninja Warrior course where you've got to jump from thing to thing to thing to thing because so much is already set, and that really forces you to, develop your writing chops. So I think it can be easier and it can also be harder, both in ways that help you learn. So yeah, I loved it. If I had time, I still would, but I do not, for I am writing many books at once right now.
Interesting. Now I'm picturing those wipeout courses, which is less about encouraging success and more about encouraging failure. Yes.
Yeah, but if you get to the end, my God, you must be good.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'm curious then. So if you started writing fan fiction, what was your first project? The first one that you were sort of aiming for professional publication?
That was These Broken Stars. So what was happening there really was the Meg Spooner, who's my co-author on These Broken Stars and many other books, including my next one, was, one of my best friends, and we had met through writing fan fiction. And the worst possible thing that can happen to an Australian had happened to me, which was that I had finally been forced to get a job, which I held off for a very long time via multiple university degrees, but eventually it came for me. And that meant that I wasn't around sort of Aussie before lunchtime, which is the American evening. And so I wasn't as in the community anymore. And so one of the ways that Meg and I were working, would sort of, I guess, try and stay in touch and write each other these love letters would be to write this fanfic together. And one day, just for no particular reason, we thought, let's write something original. But we weren't thinking of it as a book. We were still thinking of it as a sort of an open-ended project. And we were like, what do we like? We like space and we like shipwrecks. So we thought, what we'll do is we'll do a shipwreck in space, like a shipwreck on this planet. And we'll just write these two characters who get, in this lifeboat together. And then when we get bored of them, we'll just come up with two more characters and write them and two more and write them. And then eventually they can all meet each other and do whatever. And we never got past the first two. We had so much fun with the first two that we were still there writing them months later. And in the meantime, Meg, was an aspiring author and had gotten into the Odyssey Writing Workshop, which is this very selective writing workshop in the US. And she'd come home from that and she was sort of working away. And, she'd even come out to Australia for a while to work on her book, and she sold her first book. And suddenly the two of us kind of we looked at each other and we looked at what we'd written and we looked at each other again and we were like, wait a minute. Maybe this is also a story. Very much that moment. And so we started sort of trying to turn it into a book. And it turned out we had done a lot of the writing of one without ever really thinking that we were writing a book. So it was a great way to take the pressure off writing your first novel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And it also sounds too like you found that pure Zen state where the characters came alive and took over the story and you were just along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah, and we weren't thinking, what will a reader make of this or what will an editor think of this? And I still try very hard to go to that space because I think it's really important not to have those outside voices. But yeah, writing These Broken Stars was the purest writing experience that I've ever had for that reason. And what I often want to say, I think, to writers who are early in their careers, but, you've got to be thoughtful about when you say it because it's quite a punchable thing to say, is yes, it's frustrating to be at this point where, you don't know if someone's going to pick your book up. You don't know if you're going to be published. You don't know what the future holds and you want it all so much. But also the flip side to that is that you get to write with nobody watching and that's not coming again. So insofar as you can, enjoy that moment, enjoy that experience of, of it just being yours. I try to create that now. Like, I have projects that I'm working on that no one really knows about, but I do still know in my heart of hearts that ultimately I am going to show them to my agent and my editor, and that, ultimately someone will see them, and I can't unknow that. So yeah, that was a beautiful experience writing these Broken Stars.
That's a very good point, because I see there are some authors, I think famously of George R. Martin and Patrick Rothfuss, who may perhaps have too much pressure on them, knowing that everyone's waiting for the next book, and there is that pressure of expectation.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't imagine what it would be like knowing that everyone was waiting and that a lot of people were waiting to judge.
Yeah.
It's, it's always easier to think about the people who are not in good faith than to remember the vast, vast, vast majority who are just waiting to love it. So I think, one of the things you have to do as a writer for your mental health is make sure that you are writing for the vast majority who are just sitting there waiting to love it, and not writing to try and appease the minority who are never going to love it, because it doesn't matter what you do, they're still not going to love it. And you're going to end up writing away from what everyone else loves.
That's very true, actually. That's very on brand for my experience as a YouTuber, because the people who don't like my work will be the loudest about it. And often, if people just watch and don't leave a comment, that usually means they had no problem with it. They had a great time, and I should just, stick with it.
Keep doing that. Well, and the thing is, the people who are loud about not liking your channel, it's not like if you make small changes, now they're going to go, oh, well, now he's won me over. Like, now I'm in.
That's right.
It's just, I have a 5-year-old, and because I'm not wild about her saying, oh, I hate this, that's gross, I have instead taught her to say, it's not my cup of tea, which is very charming when it comes from a 5-year-old, and no one ever gets offended when she says, no, thank you, it's not my cup of tea. But the thing is, we're not some people's cup of tea, and that's actually fine. Everyone's allowed to like different things. But creating or writing to try and appease those people, you're not going to achieve it, but you are going to water down what the ones who love your particular type of tea are.
Absolutely. Now, I want to get back to, there was that topic we were talking about, fan fiction, because my wife has left this comment. There we go. Now get that to pop up. My wife is clearly in the room next to me watching along. She wants to know, what type of fan fiction did you write? Yes. She's a big fan of yours. She actually introduced me to your books first.
Well, she has great taste, and you should probably listen to her in every respect and do what she says, judging by that.
I really do, yes.
So I came through writing fan fiction set in Anne McCaffrey's worlds, particularly Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern series, which not many people have read these days. Not many people under a certain age have read these days, which I think is a great pity in a lot of respects. And I mean, Anne McCaffrey was the first woman to make the New York Times bestseller list for science fiction. She was the first woman to be named a Grand Master. She is an icon of science fiction. And when we read her work today, yes, of course, there are some things that don't really, pass the sniff test today. But she was also writing incredibly feminist science fiction. Her characters were, she had, people of color. She had disabled protagonists. She had, characters who just weren't getting a look in any other type of science fiction at the time, which was a very straight white male cis place. She was including everyone. And, like I say, some of the ways that she expresses it is not the way that you would do it today. But I think, we need to judge her by the miles ahead that she was at the time, not the distance behind that she might be now. And one of the things about Anne McCaffrey is that she was one of the most gifted world builders to ever write science fiction, hands down. And created so many incredible worlds, and I wrote in lots of them. And generally our approach was we would punt out her characters and bring in our own original characters, but use her world as a backdrop and a stage. And yeah, it was great practice. I loved it.
That's incredible, because I've got the first 2 Dragon Riders books on my shelf. They've been sitting there for about 6 months. They have just dramatically gone up in my estimation, and it's going to skip to the front of my reading list, that's for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the woman created incredible worlds. You know, her Dragon Riders of Pern series is amazing. Her Tower and the Hive series, which is about psychics of the future. It's basically about a future in which people who can teleport and telekinetically move things and telepathically speak become the universe's postal service, flinging packages to and from different planets, and this incredible, these dynasties that she writes through that, these families, and amazing world building stuff that no one else is thinking of.
So cool. Well, let's continue on. So one of my big questions is quite simply, why do you write young adults?
Oh,
is that something you just sort of? I know it's a broad question. I know that's like poor journalism. My old teacher would be like, no, specific questions are better. But like a lot of people,
I think it's a good question.
Thank you.
It is.
But like, did you fall into young adult naturally, or was that something you deliberately chose because you really believe in it?
Both. So, I mean, I read a lot of YA very naturally. I still read a lot of YA very naturally. And then when I started thinking about where I wanted my books to sit, I realized that there were reasons for that. There were reasons for YA. I remember once hearing Sarah Rees Brennan, who is bonkers talented Irish author, talk about the idea that young adult literature is the literature of transformation. It's the literature of becoming who you are going to be. And one of the things about life is that we're constantly going through these cycles of transformation. It can be first day at school, or it can be first day at the school gate, picking up your kid, and it feels like all the other parents know each other and you don't. Or it could be first date, or it could be first date after your divorce. We constantly remake ourselves. And I think that's why readers of all ages are in fact drawn to YA. And, I'm writing YA for teenagers. They are the audience that I have in mind. But I'm very aware that about half the audience are actually adult. And, again, kind of, I guess, going back to what we were talking about, how you don't need to change yourself. I don't feel like I need to cater to that adult audience. I think that they're there for what we're already doing. And so I just continue to do it. But I think, YA asks kind of big questions about who you want to be and how you want to define yourself. And we do that over and over. And, not just at landmarks in our lives, but, right now, the world is a big and scary place. And a lot of us are making choices about, what do I want to say? Who do I want to be? What do I believe? How much do I believe it? So I think YA kind of continually addresses those. And I also think YA is just the home of the ripping yarn. It's the home of the story that puts its foot in the pedal and doesn't stop. And I like that. So, it doesn't have to be action sequences. And it can be emotional drama, but, a lot happens and I love that.
Yeah, they get to the point. Nice and quick.
We sure do. I mean, sometimes it takes us 100,000 words, but my God, a lot happens on the way.
I love that. I had to stop and take a note. Literature of transformation. That's a quote I will hold you to. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Well, do you know, I actually said to Sarah Rees Brennan last year before, I was on tour in Ireland, and I said to her, she's a dear friend of mine, I quote you all the time, and this is the quote that I use. And being Sarah, she looked at me and she said, that sounds very clever. Did I say that? I was like, yes, you sure did. At the World Science Convention in London in whatever year that was, I want to say like 2012 maybe or something. I remember watching her on a panel, and that just went through me like a lightning bolt. And I was like, I think it's a good compass for writing YA. You've got to be asking yourself, like, is this about transformation? Is this about who you want to be and become and the choices that you make? So
very true. Yeah. And I'll say that's probably true why myself as a 34-year-old white male will still read YA from time to time, because I like the transformation, because I think I am a very different person today than who I was 5 years ago, and wildly different to who I was 15 years ago. Because
we should hope.
Yeah,
we should hope you're changing. And I think, the surveys, there are more surveys in the US than there are in Australia. But, the surveys in the US say that about half the people who buy YA books are adults, and about 2/3 of that number are buying for themselves. So teens have the majority, but there's plenty of grown-ups who I think are joining in as well.
Excellent. Oh, well, we'll keep going because I've got so many questions for you.
Okay. Yeah, I know. I give long answers too.
No. I think you're actually really quite concise. I'm impressed.
I'm trying.
But you write with both fantasy and sci-fi, because I think a lot of people, especially aspiring authors, think that you have to pick a lane. But that's not true at all, is it? Like, you've got to readership in both of these fields, don't you?
I mean, I don't know. Maybe you should. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. But I think, I mean, if we're talking from a pure business point of view, I think it is probably good if your first couple of books have some shared DNA, are both fantasy or both sci-fi or both thrillers or both whatever. Because ideally, the people who read your first book, you want them to see the second book and go, oh, yeah, I loved that book that she wrote, and pick up the second one and feel like they've, they know who you are as a writer now. And they will then, I think, tend to follow you no matter where you go, even if you go all over the place. But I mean, that said, I had the first two books of the Broken Stars trilogy come out and then Illuminae. And I mean, I guess that brand was like, it's romantic sci-fi in space with lots of action, but there's a lot of differences between those books as well. What am I now? I want to say 20 books deep, I think. And
feels about right, yeah.
I think, yeah, I'm pretty sure I was making a joke about the one coming out in June being like my 21st birthday. Now my books are legal to drink in America or something. But I move around a bit because I think that, it keeps it fresh. And also just sci-fi and fantasy are my two great loves. That's what I read a lot of in my own time. And so that's where my ideas tend to be. And I'm not sure I could have done 20 fantasy books in a row or 20 sci-fi books in a row. I think I need that sort of novelty to keep me moving.
Yeah, and I think one of the obvious things is people will say, fantasy, the setting's always old-timey with magic, and sci-fi is always the future and technology. Is it really that simple, or when you start writing it, is it a bit more complex than that?
I mean, I think it probably used to be mostly that simple. I think that didn't come from nowhere. I think once upon a time, almost all fantasy was, quasi medieval England, and most sci-fi was, futuristic, if not space, then like a very sort of cyberpunky sort of city, and quite possibly on another planet. And I think we've now gotten much cleverer than that. I think for a start, we are now getting to read fantasy inspired by cultures from all over the world, which is incredible. It means that, we're starting because there's nothing wrong with a good old medieval England. I mean, Lord knows, my June book is sort of that, but I love being able to read stuff, inspired by, Nigerian or Chinese, folklore, or, stuff that I didn't grow up with at my house. And it's not like I'm learning that stuff from reading these books because it's fantasy. So, it's inspired by, not a carbon copy of. But still,
there's some creative license taken, yes.
I mean, yeah, exactly. If not, then it's, historical or contemporary or something. But it's still an invitation into somebody else's world in a way that I really enjoy. And I think that, sci-fi similarly, we're writing a lot more near future stuff now. We're writing a lot of stuff that is really grappling with, the many issues that we're seeing today about how we use technology. And we don't need to sort of send those out 150, 200 years into the future in order to work out whether we, like the choices that we're making today. We can project them out 10 or 20 years and get those kinds of answers. So I think it's, it's become much, much more intricate and much more interesting and much richer for that, which makes me very happy as a reader.
Very true. Because I think with sci-fi, even though it's sci-fi set in the future, it has much more relevance to the now. Probably, would you say, argue probably more than fantasy does?
Yeah, I mean, sci-fi is about the now, for sure. I mean, sci-fi is our way of taking a question that we have about something that is happening today and extending either the consequences of doing what we're currently doing or, the consequences of making a different choice out into the future and seeing how they play out and thinking, well, is this something we like? Is this something we don't like? Do we want to change? Do we want to make different choices? And sci-fi is, set elsewhere, but it's about here and now squarely. The trick is to not be too heavy-handed about that. The trick is to let people enjoy the story. And, I always say writing a book to preach or deliver a message is never going to work. But writing a book
but
to
what if it's a really good message you're very sure about?
But
sorry, I jumped in.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. But no, I think no matter how sure I am, writing a book to ask questions that I would like the reader to answer for themselves is better. And, part of this perhaps is that before I was an author, I worked as a mediator for many years. And so my experience would be bringing two parties into a room who had disagreed with each other about everything to this point in their dispute. And they had disagreed, in fact, so much that they had needed to bring in a third party, a total stranger to both of them, in order to help them have a conversation that might resolve this thing. So pretty intense disagreements. And, my experience with that was that when you put something to someone, their brain closes. But when you ask questions in a way that is not presupposing the answer, but is actually interested in their answer, then their brain opens. And so if nothing else, writing a book to deliver a message doesn't work because no one wants to be preached at or told what someone else thinks. People want to figure it out themselves. So if my book asks questions, people are more likely, to reach their own conclusions.
Yeah. I think that's especially true when we're talking about young adults, young adult books or middle grade books, where there's a stronger tendency for adults to be like, I got to teach these kids how to do things my way. But you're right. Questions. Yeah. Got to trust your audience.
I mean, look at the world. Who's to say the adult way is actually working on any matrix at all? Let's ask questions instead.
Excellent. Great point. Well, let's talk about the Illuminae Files. Because I've always been curious about how you did the Illuminae Files, and specifically how you came up with the concept of using the file idea, like the found footage idea in a book. It's like a Blair Witch project for books.
Look, it's wild, and I think if anyone who signed us had known what they were in for, who knows if they'd have done it, because it was a wild experience for all of us. But my editor says she would have. My editor for the Illuminae Files is still my editor today. We have a book coming out together, Feb of next year, another sci-fi book. And Illuminae was the first thing we did together, and it came about because Jay and I were just friends. We were the only people we knew in Melbourne here in Australia who were publishing books. I mean, there were other people. We just didn't know. We hadn't made any friends yet, so we didn't know them. And so we would sort of have, brunch together about once a month and just be like, do you know what's going on? No, do you know what's going on? My editor keeps using this word. I don't know what it is. The window for asking has closed. Can you help me? Just try to support each other through it. And one night before we caught up for brunch, I had this dream. It was like an anxiety dream. I don't have cool dreams that inspire books. I have stress dreams. And so I had this anxiety dream that he and I were co-authoring a book, which I was doing with Meg Spooner at the time. I think These Broken Stars was very close to coming out. And in the dream, the anxiety part of it was that I had forgotten what the book was about. And I didn't want to admit that. So I spent the whole dream kind of fishing, being like, how would you pitch this book and how would you describe it? And if you were to tell someone about this next chapter, what would you say and whatever? And so I woke up and laughed at myself and went to brunch and told Jay, and he laughed at me too. And then after a while, we were both like, ha, though, like, what would that be? And the one thing I remembered about this book that we had been writing in this dream was that it was all done in emails. It was an epistolary novel. And so we started going, well, why would it be all emails? Like, why can't they get to each other? And because we're both giant nerds, we went, because they're on two separate spaceships. And from there, it started, okay, why doesn't one just take a shuttle to the other one's spaceship? Because they're being chased is why. And it started to sort of grow from there. And we did actually start thinking it was going to be emails. And then very quickly it became apparent that if we did emails the whole way through, it was going to end up being almost like a narrative. They were going to be writing each other these emails being like, I said this to him and then he said that to me. And, at that point it's kind of just a book, but you just put an email header at the top. So we suddenly realized, oh, okay, so we need surveillance footage and we need blueprints and we need, medical reports and we need diagrams and all of this, we need all of these different ways to show you what the characters are and aren't telling us. And so it just began to evolve. And we put together the first 100 pages ourselves. Jay has a design background, and so we sort of worked it up. And that was what we sold to our publisher, showing them what it was going to look like. And they signed on, and then we created the whole rest of it, and away we went. But yeah, we got really good at it by the end of Obsidio, which was the end of the third book.
Yeah.
So, oh well.
Well,
we might do old format again one day. You never know.
I think it was probably in the Illuminae gave me one of my all-time favorite literacy moments, because it's a surveillance footage scene. I actually can't remember the name of which character, but the camera's tracking this character as they run and hide, and then we don't see them anymore because the camera can't see them. And then we see the bad guys come into the scene, the bad guys looking around. I'm just sitting here being like, what's happening? I'm so tense right now.
Yeah.
It's such a great way to really visualize it.
Well, and it's much more interesting, right, than being with the character hiding, because you don't know if the bad guys are looking in the right spot. So maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You're in suspense. And, I always think of that, there's like an Alfred Hitchcock thing where he talks about the difference between surprise and suspense. And he says, 2 men are on a train and then the train blows up, and that's a surprise. But 2 men are on a train, and then we have a shot of under the table where we see a device. It's clearly a bomb and it's counting down. Now we cut back to the 2 men and they're having a conversation unaware of it. That is suspense. And that's one of my kind of guiding lights when I'm trying to write suspense is, what can I warn you about but then keep from you? So we did a lot of that with that trilogy.
That's a good one. It's similar to a Stephen King quote where I think he says, that we have 3 elements of horror, which is tension, the horror, and the revulsion. So the tension of what's going to happen, the horror of the reveal, and then the revulsion of afterwards. And he's like, of the 3, tension's the highest form, the unknown beforehand.
Yeah. It's like, you can only be about to kiss someone for the first time once. Once you've had your first kiss, that's your first kiss. Not to say your second kiss won't be amazing, but your first kiss is famous for a reason. So you got to draw it out as much as possible beforehand.
Well, also with Illuminae, there was a fair amount of horror in those books. I think I've heard you talk about this before, because like a lot of people assume that the horror all came from Jay Kristoff, but that's not entirely true, is it?
Oh, it's so funny. Yeah. I mean, people really judge based on our outsides, because Jay, for those who have not witnessed him, is 6'7", black beard covered in tattoos. And I'm usually sitting there beside him wearing a dress with flowers on. And so people tend to assume that he wrote all of the horrifying bits and that I wrote all of the romance, which I think sells us both short. He wrote some beautifully romantic bits, including some very often quoted lines. And I, despite being one of the greatest wusses to ever walk the face of this planet, absolutely came up with a whole bunch of the horrifying stuff. And I think my horror tends to be emotional horror. It tends to be stuff that, you don't want it to be happening and you're screaming, no, 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 as it's happening, rather than physical horror. But yeah, dark stuff nonetheless behind this lovely smile sometimes, but not for no reason, only to advance the story.
Yes, people assume the nice smiley ones, they're the ones who get you.
No, go on. It's true.
But I've noticed though, like I haven't read your full discography as much as that is definitely on my
there's 20 of them. No one.
I like long list of 20 books, but I've noticed so far that of what I've read, Illuminae seems to be the only one that's really like got a lot of horror in it. Is that something that isn't true? Does Aurora have a bit
more horror in it? For sure. I think there are, the Aurora cycle, starts with Aurora Rising there's a lot more kind of comedy in it, but there are some moments that are pretty horrifying. I would say These Broken Stars, the Shipwreck in Space book, has a moment when, I don't want to give anything away, but a character enters the crashed spaceship that is pretty intense. I think, a lot of them will have a moment or a touch of it. I mean, the thing is, I wouldn't describe any of them as horror so much as very, very tense moments, because some of them have touches of the sort of, I guess if we're doing the King definition, have touches of the revulsion. But, if anyone's kind of watching and going, oh, but I'm not a horror reader, I wouldn't want to put them off with the idea that they're horror. I would say Illuminae has more terror than horror, which I think is a distinction. And the rest of them, I would say they, they have a lot less, and they sort of have the normal amount of terror that you'd expect, because it's not a story if everything goes right. That's just an anecdote about a nice day. So something's got to at some point.
Interesting. Well, let's look on forward, because the other thing with Illuminae and all your wider work, as far as I know, it also, like, romance is a huge part of what you do. And I'm curious about that as well, because in the same way, why romance? Why is romance so important to you as a writer?
I mean, I'm a great romantic. I have been in the same relationship for considerably more than half my lifetime. My husband is my person, and I think that I could live a completely fulfilled life without a romantic partner, and I have lots of loved ones who do. So I don't think that it is deeply, necessary for a complete life or anything. But for me, I'm a great enjoyer of romances. I read a lot of just straight up romance novels as well. And I think, the definition of a romance novel, as opposed to a romantic novel, a romance novel has to have either a happily ever after or a happily for now ending. If it doesn't have one of those, it's not a romance novel. The pleasure in those novels is not will they live happily ever after. It is how on earth are they going to live happily ever after. It's like going on the roller coaster knowing that you're okay because it will pull into the station at the end, but having no idea what's going to be in between. The moments when it seems like they're, completely at odds and everything's overwhelming and everything's gone wrong and nothing could possibly go right again. It's those moments of thinking, how on earth is this possibly going to get fixed? And I mean, I love novels like that. And I think, not that you're doing this for a moment, but, there's this real double standard out there about sort of, like airport thrillers and Clive Custlers and whatever versus romance novels, that like one is some, people like to mock romance novels, but they don't mock, action books. And of course, one of these genres is more widely read by women. Sidebar, women are on average higher earning and better educated than the majority of the population as a cohort. Romance, don't mess with romance readers. They're amazing. But
they can take you down with a very well-written argument.
Oh my God. Yeah. the withering turn of phrase. But I mean, I love romance, and I love having romance in my stories. It's just such an enjoyable catharsis. I love stories where love is the answer. And I think, I've written in The Isles of the Gods, one of my characters is a romantic and asexual, and love is still the answer for him. It's just a different kind of love to the romantic love that his friends are experiencing for each other. And I mean, I guess it's going to sound very Pollyanna, but in the end, I just think that turning towards each other is what saves us in every sense of the word. And writing romance is one of the ways of expressing that. Not the only way, but one of them.
Of course. I like this little comment from Pixie Sticks that romance novels is journey before destination. Actually,
totally.
Quite profound.
It is. And I think that's partly because you have some sense of what the destination is, that the happily ever after for now, which means you can just enjoy the journey. It's like going on holiday with your super organized friend and being like, I already know that my friend has looked up every restaurant, has got every train connection, has got everything sorted, so I can just be transported, and it's going to be great.
And so my wife is showing up again. Kit wants to know if you have any personal favorite romance books.
Oh, so many. I will, because I write young adult and middle grade, I will caveat this by saying that the content in these books is not necessarily suitable for the teenage reader. I mean, they may wish to, but I don't want to be the one who got in trouble for recommending it. But my two favorite romance authors are Kylie Scott, who's an Australian, The first book I ever read by her was called Lick. It's about a part of a quartet about a rock band. And my other favorite romance author is Serena Bowen, who writes piles of fantastic stuff. But I would recommend her Ivy Years series. But we could do a solid hour interview of me just recommending romance novels, and I would not be done by the end. So that's for another day.
That's amazing. It's actually, you might enjoy this, but so like I might be called the book guy, but my wife actually reads more books than I do, which is terribly offensive to me. I just
well, I mean, the thing about a romance novel is it's often a quick read. It's often, you fly through it because you're drawn along by it so much. But I think, to kind of go back to the why romance, because I'm thinking a little bit about my middle grades and what does my middle grade books have in common with my YA books. And the thing is, ultimately, they are still books about finding common ground, turning toward each other. Like in my middle grade books, the kids are like 11. No one's even got a crush in these books. No one's even thinking about it. And which did not stop one of my middle grade books from being banned in various locations in America for having unnecessary homosexual content. Which, in case you're wondering how that... look, the desperate urge to write back and query their definition of necessary homosexual content was there, but I decided not to engage. But, I can only assume that the content that offended them was the fact that one of the children's teachers, their combat professor, who was a woman, someone mentioned that she had a wife. We didn't see the wife on screen or anything. They just mentioned her existence, and I think that's what sunk me, but I don't know. But even in those books, it's still about love. It's still about leaps of faith and, finding your people and being prepared to throw everything in with them. And I think, whether that love is romantic or otherwise, that's kind of what my stories always end up being about.
That's really eye-opening to me, actually, because I think, I'm always fine with romance because I love, like you. My romance is a big part of my life. I can't imagine myself without it. But romance in a book does have a lot of predictability, because we generally know the destination. But you're right that it's about the journey, the how do we get there, and creating as much tension in the meantime about how impossible that perfect destination actually looks.
Yeah, really just all point. Adds to the enjoyment of reading it. It's great.
Fantastic. Oh. Well, look, I knew I would learn something. I don't mean to be surprised, but I'm just very overjoyed about that.
Yeah, no, I think it really changes the way that you think about a romance novel once you've got that frame in your head.
Definitely. Well, I did want to chat more about your collaborations, because that is such a fascinating idea that you co-author so many of your books with other people. Because I've never done that. That just sounds impossible, right? But what is that like?
Most people haven't. I'm a rampant extrovert, so there's that. I love working with someone else. I did get that
sense.
Yeah, no, people pick it up quite quickly. And I think there is also an element of, I think because I've got 3 different co-authors, I work with Jay Kristoff and I work with Megan Spooner in YA, and then I also write with Ryan Groudon in middle grade. I think that makes people think, that it must just be very easy because I do it so often. I would counter and say, no, I'm just very, very good at choosing my co-writing partners. Because you're looking for people who, there are lots of different ways to co-write. And all of them are fine, provided they're what the people who are doing it came for. So, sometimes you'll see a partnership where one person who is more established perhaps writes an outline, and then the other person will draft, and then the more established author will sort of help edit. And provided that's what everyone signed up for, 2 thumbs up, have a great time. And, other times you'll see people literally sitting at the keyboard together and writing scenes together. And again, so long as no one's tearing their hair out, 2 thumbs up, have a great time. I sit somewhere in the middle of that, more towards the 2 people at the keyboard end, where my writing partner and I will sit down together and we'll start outlining. And I am more of an outliner than any of my 3 writing partners, but I get a little more loosey-goosey when I write with them, and they get a little more structured, because there's not, otherwise you end up, I hand you a book and then you look at it and go, oh, you killed who? But I was going to use it. Like, how's that going to, so you've got to have some some agreement. And so generally we'll sort of outline in detail what's going to happen, maybe sort of 100 pages ahead. And because we've found if we go much further, we'll have a good idea and end up throwing out half the outline. So we'll outline ahead, and then we'll sort of divide it up by who's got stewardship of which character and who's going to write which bit. And, we'll then write bits and pass them back and forth and edit as we go and continue to sort of knit them together in a master document. And, ultimately you're looking for someone whose voice you love and you want to lift up their voice the same as they want to lift up your voice. And, rather than trying to drown each other out. And sometimes, I'll be the one wanting to throw my joke out because I've read it 15 times and I don't think it's funny anymore. My co-author will be like, over my dead body, that's amazing. And they'll be like, oh, I just think this bit where I stop and describe it all, like, what's it for? And I'll be like, it's for establishing this incredible new setting, so we'll defend, we'll defend each other's bits. And I think you end up with a much stronger project as a result. But, I think my co-authors and I always say it's kind of like being married. Like if you choose the right person, it's going to be great. If you choose the wrong person, it's going to be a bad time for everybody involved. And
no therapy will help.
No amount. There are some marriages that are just not meant to be happening. Yeah. And I think, ultimately you're looking at for someone who you both want to get to the same destination, but left to your own devices, you would both naturally take a bit of a different path. But you do want to go the same place and you're interested in each other's paths and you're saying, show me this bit of how you would get there. Let me show you what I would do. And, you pull the best from both worlds and often you come up with something that you never would have thought of at all, except that you happen to be talking. So I love it. I mean, it's evening here in Australia. I spent this morning chatting with Megan Spooner because we're writing our June 2026 book. We're drafting right now in May 2025. It's the sequel to the book that we've got coming out in June 2025. The goal being to have book 2 written before book 1 comes out, hopefully. Although it's going to be down to the line. It's a long book, it's turning out. But it's such a joy, because so often, and, you'll have this experience as well as a writer, if you want to get someone's help brainstorming, you've got to give them so much context that by the time you get to the end of it, it sort of wasn't really worth the effort. Whereas your co-author is already in the foxhole with you, and you can just tell them exactly what you're stuck on, and they'll just come up with an idea for you straight away. So it's a delight. I love it. Lots of people think I'm insane and couldn't and wouldn't at gunpoint, but I love it, and I also love writing solo. So it's a good mix for me.
It's interesting because it also sounds like when most people are writing a book, they do all the writing and then all the redrafting and then all the editing. But when you're working with someone, you kind of got to do it all simultaneously, right? Because you're
at least a little.
So it's all
yeah. So I mean, this morning when I woke up, Meg had sent me the latest chapter that she'd written. And so my work for today was I went through her chapter and I annotated it, half of it with just laughing at jokes and saying, this is good bit of foreshadowing and we should use this for X later. I'm going to leave this comment to tell me. And then occasionally, suggesting a tweak, you used the word hold and holding in 2 consecutive sentences. What if we change one of them to X or, that sort of stuff. And so I did all of that. And I then wrote my chapter and I've emailed it off to her. So she'll wake up in her morning and she'll go through all of my edits and she'll accept and, integrate them all. She will then edit my chapter and she'll then write her next one. So that by the time it comes to me, I will then go over the edits she did on my chapter, write my next one. And so we tend to have quite clean drafts by the end. And that's how I've worked with all of my co-authors.
Wow. So working with someone on the opposite side of the world where they're working while you're asleep, that must be so efficient.
Yeah, it's like the shoemaker and the elves, you wake up and someone's taken all that leather and turned it into shoes for you. It's great. You wake up and there's just a whole chapter of your book that wasn't there before with funny jokes. It's so good. Recommend.
I could get used to that. Sounds appealing.
I know, right? People are like, I could never. And I'm like, you haven't tried it.
Well, it's also really interesting because I think one of the big things that new authors struggle with is just simply the act of communicating, because they know how to communicate in a way that makes sense to them. But when their editor reads it, they're like, I don't know what you're saying here. or this doesn't make sense, and it's just the practicality of communicating in a way that will make sense to other people when they don't hear it in your tone of voice. So I imagine collaboration would really challenge that a lot. Just communicating what you mean to communicate.
I actually think fan fiction really set me up for that, because with fan fiction, I was writing for specific audiences, and so you got constant feedback loops, and you always knew if people understood what you were saying or not, and you learned quite quickly what worked and what got a reaction and what didn't. So, in this sort of delightfully low stakes way, because no one was going to tell you that this thing you did was absolutely terrible and why are you in this business. They just probably wouldn't get that excited about it if it wasn't very good. And I was in very nice communities. I don't know if it's different elsewhere, but I think on the whole, fanfic people are more about like, go towards what you're into, don't, pull down what you're not. But yeah, I think that really taught me to find ways to express things that would hit my audience as well. And again, I think constantly having your co-author go through your stuff. I mean, even when I write solo now, like my 3 co-authors live in my head, like a little Greek chorus, being like, is that clear? Are we in White Room Syndrome again? Have we described the setting? Could there be more conflict in this scene? So, it's quite helpful. Because I like them, I guess.
Well, that does lead me to my next question, because you've written Isle of the Gods, which it's a bit of an oddity for you because you wrote it all yourself. You don't.
I did, I'd written. I mean, I just haven't had time, honestly. I wrote a middle grade series on my own, but I mean, the truth is I only in part found the time for that because one of my beloved editors came to me and said, I have got a hole in my slate. It's for a middle grade fantasy trilogy. And I know you've been wanting to write middle grade. You want to have a crack at it? And I was like, yes, I do. Let me in. But, I think the Isles of the Gods, it's a seafaring high fantasy about a magician prince who has to prevent a war between the gods and the sailor girl who has to help him, who is absolutely sick of his shenanigans from minute one. And, I was writing that book. I started that book 10 years before it was released. I started it in May of 2013 and it came out in May of 2023. And the reason it took so long was that, when so much of it arrived right up front. I was so sure I had it. I had all the characters and they remained the characters to the end. I had the magic system. I had the setting. I had the main conflict. I had everything. And I wrote a red hot 2 chapters and then just smashed face first into a brick wall because I wasn't good enough to write it yet. Because what I wanted with this series was for it to just be like, I grew up reading David Eddings and, those sorts of fantasies that were just full of adventure and, things kind of constantly happening and gangs of, characters who, sassed each other and fell in love with each other and kind of everything in between. And I knew that I wanted this to be like an adventure story that just like picked you up and rocketed along. But the problem was the only way I knew 10 years earlier to write a story that picked you up and rocketed along with you was to be allowed to give you a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation first that went, okay, so here's the gods, here's how religion works, here's the magic, here's how it works, here's the geography, here's the war that happened 500 years ago that has shaped the tensions that are now building in this world in the same way that, our failure to deal properly with the conflict after World War I ended up sort of partly creating World War II. And here's, the technology, and here's how the magic has affected and unfortunately they frown on PowerPoint presentations for, before books.
Yep.
And so I had to get good enough to be able to weave all of that in without you noticing that I was doing it. And that, I kept coming back to it over the years and never quite being there. And it took that long. I was determined that was going to be the first solo YA book I wrote. And eventually I got there, thank heavens. So that one.
Well, that is very encouraging.
Yeah, I've got another solo YA coming 2026, which is set in space, totally different, but lots of fun. I mean, it's still got a couple who give each other a lot of grief, but, that's something I enjoy. I love banter.
Yeah. But no, it's very encouraging that it's possible to have a good idea years before you're actually skilled enough to write it. Yeah. I think a lot of authors would take that as a great source of encouragement, that
Yeah, absolutely.
you can
I think
have the ambition that exceeds your abilities, and that's okay. You just keep practicing.
you should have the ambition that exceeds your abilities. Ira Glass talked on Chicago Public Radio about the taste gap, which, the best way to get a good explanation of it is to Google the taste gap. But the taste gap is that experience that we all have as creatives of looking at something you're doing and knowing it's not as good as you wanted it to be. And he says the taste gap, that's the taste gap. And it's a good sign because it means you would know what good looked like if you could achieve it. Whereas if you look at what you've done and you go, perfect, incredible, first draft, no changes, send it to print, it means you don't know how to make it any better. If you look at it and you're like, oh, this just feels a bit slow in places and it feels like, I don't understand what's driving it in this bit and so on, that's great. You mightn't know how to execute it yet, but at least you know what it would look like if it was good. And that means you can start to work on closing the taste gap and building your skills towards it. So, I have a big, ambitious book I'm working on right now that I don't even imagine I'm going to show my editor for another 5 years. I was saying to my husband just this morning, I got to stop dreaming that this book is going to be ready this year because it's just never going to happen. But it's my taste gap book at the moment. It's my big, ambitious thing that I'm going to get good enough to write it. But
hell yeah,
I'm not good enough yet. And that's okay. That's the fun of it.
Fantastic. No, I get that. My current books are about 400 to 450 pages long, but I have an idea for a 1,000-page monster, and it is so far beyond my abilities at the moment.
Right? Yep.
I'm getting there.
Yeah. But you look at a project like that and you're like, well, I've been wrestling 8 armed octopuses until now, and I am pretty sure that one has 472 tentacles, so I'm going to need to build up to it. But no harm in having the dream.
I like how, as Australians, we both just skipped right over wrestling crocodiles. I mean, it felt like it was in the room with us.
Right? Yeah, true.
That's right, octopuses. It's the ones you don't expect that get you. That's
exactly right.
Anyway,
yeah.
That's a slightly dark joke. But with Isle of the Gods, one of the reasons I'm curious because you wrote that one alone, but I remember reading in the author's note at the start of it, you talked about how you grew up on boats and ships and on the water.
I did.
So was that a big part of the reason why you wanted to do that one yourself? Because it had a certain personal element to it. If you don't mind me asking,
I hadn't thought about it that way. No, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think you're right. I think if I had been trying to write that book with a writing partner, I would have been unbearably bossy because, I grew up sailing. I literally took my first steps on a boat. I taught sailing for years. And I always feel the need to say for my international audience that, because I've only learned after years of talking about this, that in some countries, for instance, in the States, sailing is a very posh thing to do. It's like popped collar, glass of champagne, my hand on the wheel of a giant yacht. Whereas in Australia, 95% of the population lives on the coast, and it is possible to just have a banged up old dinghy that you just go sailing in, and it does not signal that champagne lifestyle level of privilege, which I did.
It's basically a cardboard box. Yeah.
I mean, some of them were, but I took my first steps on a boat. I taught sailing. I loved it. I've always loved it. And I think I would have been unbearably bossy with, that's not how any of it works. If I'd been working with someone else, it just felt very much like a story that came from me. So, yeah, I do love that one. I love that book a lot.
No, Isle of the Gods. There were some peak YA books right there. I loved it. And the magic system for that one actually was a real highlight for me. Not to spoil it for anyone, but in order to use magic in Isle of the Gods, you have to give something. Like physically give something. And the more emotional weight it has to the person, the more power you get from it. And Amie, I just thought you did such a good job of creating emotional weight to so many objects so that multiple times through the series you could break our hearts. Yeah.
I'm one of those people who I do treasure little things. Like I'm never going to be a minimalist. That's just not how I'm built. So like I'm sitting here, and at my desk, I've got my little inspiration pile sitting beside me. So I've got, see if I can get the camera to work. I've got a little ammonite because for me, this sparks incredible wonder that it's 110 million years old, and I got it for like $5. And the fact that I can have something that is 110 million years old sitting here on, my desk, and I've got a tiny little piece of meteorite, because again, it's a meteorite, and I've got it sitting right here on my desk. It's incredible. I could keep doing show and tell with my office for a long time, but it's back. But I'm one of those people who, like, little things do mean a lot to me. So, and I still have a lot of stuff from my childhood. So for me, being able to attach emotional weight to something, it doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to have something in it that touches your heart. So I did feel very bad for my characters occasionally having to throw those things away.
I get that.
That's my job.
Now, I just want to check. We have reached the 1 hour mark. Are you good to continue just a little bit more, or are you ready to?
Yeah. All right. So for viewers, I'm in my little office at the bottom of the garden, and I'm eyeballing the back door, and I cannot see my child about to run down the garden. So I think we're all right for a few minutes.
You sure we're good?
Yeah, we're fine.
Love it.
She's a child of the pandemic. She understands what a video call is, because she was little when we did lockdown. So she knows that if she comes into my office and she sees me chatting at my computer, it means there'll be someone on the screen. And that if she waves and blows kisses, they'll wave and blow kisses back, because, there's a cute kid and that's what we all do. She has done this in some very high-powered Hollywood meetings as a small child. But it, definitely broke the tension, I guess. But yeah, I don't think she knows I'm here, so I think we're okay.
That's exciting. And I know your state during the COVID lockdowns was the especially strict one, but also the one that had the least deaths. So funny that.
Oh, I mean, it worked. Yeah.
Yes.
286 days in hard lockdown, not that we were counting. But no, also we kept our hospitals from being overwhelmed. So, it worked. It was a tough time
Medical
creatively,
advice.
of course. But, I know, it was science. Who knew? No, look, it was a rough time to be writing. But, my challenge of how do I make up a story did not really stack up alongside the challenge of, say, my best mate who was at a hospital in PPE all day. So I forged through.
Yes. Well, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about your upcoming book. So, Lady and the Night. Am I saying the right?
Nearly, Lady's Night.
Ladies' Night. Sorry.
Ladies' Night, but like night with a K.
Yes.
This book, I love it so much.
Yeah.
It's coming out at the start of June.
In a European setting, isn't it?
So it's kind of like A Knight's Tale meets My Lady Jane with a little bit of the Great. It's very anachronistic. So, it's set in medieval England, but also there are cheerleaders at the tournament, and, we're drinking cocktails, and, we're inventing, there's a vendor selling tournament shirts, which we'll shorten to T-shirts because, who's got the time. It is about two girls. One is a blacksmith, and she knows pretty soon she's going to have to settle down and get married and do her duty. But right now she has been running her father's smithy for the last few years, because since her mum died, he's just not that functional. And she just wants one moment of glory. And she's made her own armor, and she decides she is going to enter the tournament anonymously. And she just wants to win a qualifying round and just have that one moment of knowing that she could. And our other character, Lady Isabel, is the prize for the tournament. She is going to be given away to whichever crusty old man wins it, and she's not up for it. And so when she realizes that the blacksmith girl is that mysterious knight, they strike up a deal. And the idea is that she will sponsor Gwen, and Gwen will try to win the tournament. And Gwen will win a fat stack of cash. Amazing. And Isabel, it only says that you may marry her. It doesn't say you must. So Isabel will get away free and defer her doom for a little bit longer. And it's a cozy fantasy. It's very funny. It's very feminist. It's, we joke at the moment. It's for like, if you feel like running the patriarchy through with a jousting lance, then do we have the book for you? The ladies are not expecting to fall in love with one another, but these things happen. It is actually, speaking of lockdowns, I joke, but it's not really a joke, that every author out there who was working sort of from 2020 onwards, everyone's got a lockdown book. And for some people, those books are, dark and, they're really working out the distress and the horror. For us, our book is light and cozy and happy and is just everything that we love unabashedly shoved in one book, along with a whole bunch of, jokes and puns along the way. And, it's been really lovely so far because, early readers who have been getting review copies, they've been getting it. They all think that the jokes are funny. Yeah. They love the romance. And this book just makes me so happy. It's my happy place book. It's my lockdown nearly burned me out, let's write our way back to joy kind of cozy fantasy.
Love it. That's fantastic. I think I must have watched Heath Ledger's Knight's Tale 100 times as a kid. The whole jousting tournament thing was so cool. So yeah, I'm there for it.
Right? But you know what? But I'll tell you something. During lockdown, Meg and I, she was in America and I was here in Australia, and we would watch movies together sometimes. It was, I think we all did it, with like the Netflix party app or whatever. So you could be chatting, you could, sync your screens and both be chatting. And so we watched A Knight's Tale together, and we came out the end of it being like, man, we loved this movie when it came out, and it's still really good. But what it doesn't have a lot of is ladies. Like the blacksmith, who's called Kate, by the way. You can find that out if you hear her name uttered one time during the movie or check the credits. She features a little bit. And there's Lady Jocelyn, but we were like, what if this?
There's two of them. Yeah.
Ladies all the way down. And like, not mean girl ladies, not girl versus girl, not girls as enemies, not mean girls ladies, just ladies looking after each other, having a great time. So yeah, this book just makes my heart happy. And I am, I'm going to get to spend the back half of 2025 talking about it. And I'm, as you can see from the way I'm lighting up, I'm just really happy about it.
Absolutely lit up. I love it. That's cool because, I confess when you said, I forget the main girl, not Isabel.
Gwen.
The main one. Gwen. Okay, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
When you said she went to the tournament, for some reason, I immediately assumed that she would be entering in disguise as a man in a Mulan situation.
Yeah. No, she totally is. Yeah,
totally
she is disguised as a guy. Because they would never let a girl enter. These are people who think that giving a girl away as a tournament prize is a good idea. So, here we find ourselves. Ladies and gentlemen, the patriarchy. But no, it's it's a disguise that she's not great at it, but she makes it work. So she's it's a lot of fun, this book. And it's a lot of fun.
And you're already planning out the sequel to it. How many? Is this duology? You seem to have found the duology to be your format, or are we going further for this one?
I mean, let's find out. I think we will see from the shape of book 2 whether we want to go further or not. Like, it's the idea is that there is sort of an overarching plot and character growth, but also each of the books is its own completely individual story. So, Ladies' Night you could read as a standalone. It fully has an ending, and which is, I don't know. I think you need a good mix in your life, don't you, of books that have sequels that you've got to wait for, but also books that you can just read and be like, I got to the end and it was done. But then, book 2 will be what comes after Happily Ever After. What happens when you get together in, you've got the big finale and the big climax and everything happens and there's drama and there's, validation and all the other things. What happens when you then got to live it? So it's, it's a different kind of romance.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, look, honestly, that is pretty much it for my prepared remarks. I'm happy to talk about other topics you have close to your heart, or you can ask me questions. I don't mind. But
oh gosh, I could talk forever. One thing I will say is, for those who are watching who would like to hear about Ladies' Night or other stuff, I would love it if they joined my newsletter, because social media, man, it's a lot. And I periodically have to take pretty big breaks from it to write books. And even when I'm around, Instagram shows you post to like 10% of your followers. which results in things like me going on book tour and then people messaging me and being like, I just wish you'd come to Chicago. And me being like, I was not only there last night, but I also posted about it 16 times and just you never saw it because that's the way it goes. So I've somewhat surrendered on social media. One day I'll be rich enough to surrender completely and no one will be able to stop me. But I really actually love writing my newsletter. It makes me really happy. I write it once a month and it's like I'm writing the one that I'm going to send out in a few days now. And it's about hope and, things that bring us hope and that bring us respite. So that's at amiekaufman.com. And, I feel like if people have enjoyed listening to us yapping, then it's more of that. So I would really like to see them there because it's such a lovely community. A lot of people hit reply on it and email me, which is really, I feel like I'm really chatting to my readers in a way that I really enjoy.
Lovely. And, I'll add to that because I actually, I know personally, I follow a couple of people and sign up to their newsletters as well, because one of the downsides to algorithms on social media platforms is they often change on a whims. And if you talk about certain topics, they tend to penalize you. So one of the ways to bypass that and to make sure you're actually getting the information and connecting with the people is to go with their newsletters. I've been reading up Will Wheaton's newsletter. He's a fantastic writer.
Yeah, he's great.
From Star Trek. Yeah, he's a wonderful human being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I follow everything Will does.
He's from my Facebook all the time. Human beings.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's a great actor, writer, and also audio narrator. He's fantastic. But I think, he's a great example of I actually want to hear about what is he working on behind the scenes and what is he, what is he creating? And also I want to know when he's got a new thing out so I can go check it out. And, I think he has a brand new podcast coming out, featuring short fiction. And I sure wouldn't know that from social media because hasn't decided to show me. So, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here. Everyone watching knows the same.
No, very true.
Yes, that would be my closing note, would be if you've enjoyed the chat, come and have another one.
Excellent. Great. Well, I'll just reiterate for everyone's sake. So Amie's written a whole bunch of books. I've only got a couple here, but there's much more. She's done Illuminae, which I think I've talked about on my channel, and I Love the Gods, which I haven't talked about yet. I was hoping to get there, but my schedule's crazy. But check out her website as well. She's got so many books, lots of middle grade, lots of YA, sci-fi, fantasy. She's got something you'll enjoy reading, all right? So definitely check it out. And Amie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on here. And I didn't have to work very hard at all to get you talking, which is always a pleasure.
No one ever does. That's one thing you can say for me. Thanks for having me.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well, we'll end it there. So I just want to say to everyone watching, thank you so much for watching today and for watching in the future or whenever you're watching. Just thanks in general. And, like and subscribe, do all of that stuff. And we'll talk to you another time. And we'll see if we can get some more authors on here. We'll normalize these discussions, talking within the industry and trying to get some more information about that. But once again, Amie, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you.
What a pleasure to visit.
Perfect. All right, we'll end it now. Thank you. There we go.